Okay, it is 12:03. The mayor is not going to be joining us today, so I am going to call this meeting to order. And this is the regular noon meeting of the City Council of City of Boise. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Bajent.
Here.
Clegg.
Here.
Halliburton.
Here.
Sanchez.
Here.
Thompson. Woodings.
Here.
5 present, 1 absent.
Thank you. Next order of business is a request to approve the minutes of the City Council work session and City Council regular evening meeting of October 20th.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I approve, or I motion to approve the City Council meeting minutes from the work session and the regular evening session. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Halliburton.
Yes.
Sanchez.
Yes.
Woodings.
Yes.
Bajent.
Yes.
Clegg.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Next order of business is the consent agenda. All items with an asterisk are considered to be routine by the council and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a council member or citizen so requests, in which case the item will be removed from the general order of business and considered in its normal sequence.
Madam Mayor, I motion that we approve the consent agenda. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Halliburton.
Yes.
Sanchez.
Yes.
Woodings.
Yes.
Bajent.
Yes.
Clegg.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Item 4 is ordinances. We have two ordinances on the first reading calendar.
Madam Mayor, I ask unanimous consent that all ordinances on the first reading be read by number and title only and filed for the second reading calendar.
Without objection.
ORD-37-20 and ordinance CAR 19-00021 for property located at 1101 South Denver Avenue, 1108 South Grant Avenue, 1116 West Beacon Street, and 1105 South Manitou Avenue, amending zoning classifications of the city of Boise City to change the classification of real property, particularly described in section 1 of this ordinance from medium density residential R-2 to University District U, setting forth a reasoned statement in support of such zone change and providing an effective date. ORD-38-20 and ordinance CAR 20-00009 for property located at 1709 and 1711 South Federal Way, amending zoning classifications of the city of Boise City to change the classification of real property, particularly described in section 1 of this ordinance from medium density residential R-2 to multifamily residential with design review R-3D, setting forth a reasoned statement in support of such zone change and providing an effective date.
Thank you. Now the second reading calendar, we have two ordinances on the second reading.
Madam Mayor, I ask unanimous consent that all ordinances on the second reading calendar be read by number and title only and filed for the third reading calendar.
Without objection.
ORD-34-20 and ordinance CAR 19-00031 for property located at 511 North Maple Grove Road, amending zoning classifications of the city of Boise City to change the classification of real property, particularly described in section 1 of this ordinance from light industrial with design review, M-1D to neighborhood commercial with design review and development agreement, C-1D DA, setting forth a reasoned statement in support of such zone change and providing an effective date. ORD-35-20 and ordinance amending the solid waste franchise agreement by and between the city of Boise, by and through its public works department, the city, and Allied Waste Services of North America, LLC, doing business as Republic Services of Boise, Republic Services, adopting an updated reimbursement rate schedule to increase reimbursement rates paid to Republic Services for solid waste collection and disposal services, providing an effective date and approving a summary of the ordinance.
Thank you. And there is one ordinance on the third reading calendar.
And Madam Mayor, I just need the number for that ordinance. I don't have it in front of me.
ORD 32-20.
Madam Mayor, I move that further reading of ordinance 32-20 be dispensed with and that the record reflect it has been read the third time in full.
I have a second.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Would the clerk please call the roll?
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Bagent,
Yes.
Clegg.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries. ORD-32-20, an ordinance CAR 19-00028 for property located at 9,000 West State Street, amending zoning classifications of the city of Boise City to change the classification of real property particularly described in section 1 of this ordinance from single-family residential R-1A to high-density residential with design review R-3D, setting forth a reasoned statement in support of such zone change and providing an effective date.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I ask that ordinance 32-20 be approved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Bagent,
Yes.
Clegg.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. And now on to item 5, which is special business. And today our first item on special business is interim budget changes. And I think we have Shannon.
Good
Welcome.
afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of City Council. Today, we have 2 interim budget changes for you. The first one is for the Boise Municipal Health Trust is the end-of-year adjustment in the amount of $950,000. Approval of this request is to better align the budget with the actuals that have occurred. And our second one is for the library. It is to transfer the ILS and gift fund balances from the general fund to the Heritage Fund. Approval of this will help streamline business processes and ensure the proper management of the use of the designated funds.
Any questions of Shannon? Shannon, I have a question. We've never had to make a healthcare trust transfer, have we, before?
No, we have not. What had occurred is when the budget was developed way back in February of 2019, the health trust members were not planning on increasing their premiums. And in addition, we had higher than planned for member usage signing up. So since we had higher revenues, we just figured to bring the budget in alignment more with the actuals, we would do a revenue neutral increase just so the actuals wouldn't be so far off.
Great. Well, it sounds like it's actually working how we intended when we set it up.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. We do need a motion to approve the interim budget changes.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I move to approve both interim budget changes.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Wooding,
Yes.
Bagent,
Yes.
Clegg.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the remainder of our meeting is also special business, but these are various updates on things that the city's been working on. First up is a housing strategy. Is Mark online? Okay. Or Leon's online. Okay. Mark and Leon in Planning and Development Services. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Council President, members of the council. I'm Leon Lutzen, Program Manager for Grower Housing, and I'll be providing an update on this program. And joining me will be Andrea Tuning from Comprehensive Planning, who's overseeing the Housing Bonus Ordinance and the Zoning Code rewrite. So Mark will be watching via YouTube, so it'll be Andrea and I working with the two of you today. So I'll share my screen and we'll get started. Okay. All right, so we've been before you several times with Grower Housing, but we thought we'd give you some good news in terms of what we've actually been working on and achieving over the last few months, particularly since I started managing the program. So as you'll recall, let me move this out of the way so it's not blocking anything. There are 4 strategies that make up Grower Housing. The first is the establishment of a housing land trust. Second is to align public and private funding and resources available in our community for the development of affordable housing. The third is to expand the housing incentive program that we initially launched a few years ago in the downtown in particular, and to expand that citywide. And then finally, to maximize land use allowances. So concerning the Housing Land Trust, Franklin and Orchard is really our first attempt at the Housing Land Trust and putting this project together. As you'll recall, we awarded the contract with Jay Fisher based out of Salt Lake to construct this project on the Central Bench. It's located at Franklin and Orchard, thus the name Franklin and Orchard. Pictured here is Franklin Park, which has quickly become a gem for the Central Bench. And this will be a 200+ unit project. It'll include a mix of housing types and a range of household incomes and levels of affordability. It will also include several small-scale commercial spaces and is intended to support the growth of the community activity center for the Central Bench. You will see some updates on this moving forward. It's currently scheduled to go before planning and zoning in the next month or so, and should be in front of you soon, with the hope that in the fall of 2021, we'll actually have this under construction and moving towards creating more housing up on the bench. But that's what we were focusing on. So now jumping forward, we want to get some properties ready for kind of the next phase of the Housing Land Trust. And I'm happy to explain the Housing Land Trust real quick. In general, it's city-owned property that we enter into a long-term land lease with the developer to ensure term of affordability, rates of affordability, design of the project, and so forth. And I think we've figured out a lot of things with Franklin Orchard, and we should see those reflected in these upcoming projects. Again, providing either of these pan out. We're still in due diligence with what we refer to as the Smokey Davis site. Arthur and State Street was the former location of Smokey Davis. It's 0.95 acres, zone C2, which supports 43.5 units per acre. It's in close proximity to Taft Elementary and several neighborhood services, as well as access to public parks and the Greenbelt. And on State Street, obviously being very important as kind of our premier future multimodal corridor. On the right is Hillcrest, as we're calling it, which is located within the Hillcrest Shopping Center. It's nearly 5 acres in size, again, zone C2, and supports 43.5 units per acre. We're excited about this site. We think that just all the walkability, the transit that supports the site, the adjacent uses really make this an interesting property for us. We are in due diligence on both of these still, however, so no final decisions have been made. Any final decision made on those properties would be brought before council to ultimately bless.
Leon?
Yes.
I don't know if anyone else has questions, but I'd like to ask real quickly. On the Smokey Davis site, where is the bus stop on that side of the road? Is there one in this stretch? And could we use the odd triangle corner perhaps to have a bus stop with more amenities that we might usually have?
Yes, Council President Clegg, it is closer to the intersection of 36th and State. So if you can see my cursor here, hopefully, down in this area, I'm not sure where the next next location actually is, but there's one within 500 to 1,000 feet of the subject property. I certainly couldn't explore that with VRT in the future. So next phases on both of these would, one, to actually acquire them, and then two, kind of similar to what we did with Franklin and Orchard, prepare an RFP to request proposals from the development community. But similar to what we've done with Franklin and Orchard, having discussions with other agencies in the area and seeing where we can align different interests like that would certainly be a part of this process as well.
Okay, thank you. I didn't think it was right there, but I thought I would at least mention it. And on the Hillcrest site, similarly, I assume we're working internally with other departments who, the library is right across the strip mall street from this, to ensure that all the interests that we might want to consider in this site are being considered.
Certainly, yes. Similar to what we did, again, with Franklin and Orchard, we had a lot of stakeholder and agency discussion up front. a very robust conversation with the neighborhood in terms of what they want to see out of a project here or what's important to them. So we would go through that same process here up front. And then in my former life as a current planner, it's kind of on the planner and the planning department to make sure that those things are all coming together as well. So I think there's multiple checkpoints for that to allow us to do that work.
Thank you.
All right, so moving on to the next strategy, aligning public and private funding and resources. So pictured here are two of our projects that are up and running. A lot of effort went into both of these, a lot of funding from various sources, IHFA, the City of Boise, Housing Authority, multiple nonprofit and for-profit organizations. And I'd say both of these kind of align more within the Our Path Home program, which is, a housing adjacent program for Grow Our Housing. I think we're all still figuring out what they do and what we do and how we're creating a home for everyone, but we're all very happy about that. But I think these are two great examples of how we've been able to bring public and private funding together in our community. And I'd say a really good example currently under construction in terms of what's next. I apologize if you can't see any of my little labels down here with my trying to move this box out of the way. These are the Grove Street apartments located adjacent to the Basque Block. Clay Carley and several others are working on these. And again, we're seeing funding from the city. Again, HUD funding, CCDC is a partner in this. So again, another example of how we can align all of these public and private resources to bring more affordable housing into the community. And then the last one before I hand it off to Andrea for her piece, the housing incentives program. So council will see probably a more in-depth discussion on this in the coming weeks, as we're really hoping to get this up and running again here soon. But the housing incentives program basically is a subsidy for the creation of affordable housing. It can actually also be used to exempt impact fees, which is attractive to many developers because it gives them that kind of upfront financial incentive to get the project started. But real quick, at a high level, what we're seeing here is in the center is kind of a breakout of our households as they exist today in the city of Boise. And just projecting into the future based on what the household composition looks like today, we know that 1 in 3 new housing units, and as you recall, several years ago, we established a goal of 1,000 new housing units a year. 1 in 3 of those needs to be at 80% AMI or below to really meet kind of the needs of our community, particularly these groups here that range from low to extremely low when it comes to area median income. Looking at what we have right now, we know there's a significant deficit of existing housing for 30% AMI and below up here, 6,000 plus. And what that means is, we don't have 6,000 people who are homeless here. We have people who are renting outside of their AMI level, outside of their comfort level to really truly have, livability by having to forego too much of their income to pay to live in this community. We also know that there's a smaller deficit of existing housing for the 80 to 100% AMI, about 2,000 units. But what we've seen is the market largely addressing this in the form of particularly a lot of multifamily development has really stepped in and helped us just create more naturally occurring housing at that level. So what are we doing next?
Madam Mayor.
Yes, is this?
Hi, Leon.
Councilmember Riddings.
Yeah, back on this last slide, it would be interesting to know how our pie breaks out compared to our peer cities on,
Okay.
like what our income levels are in Boise and how many we have fitting into this. It could be a really great beginning of a conversation. Yes, I agree that we need to address the housing piece, but we may need to also address the economic development piece and making sure that we're moving people up in income level. First meeting them where they're at, getting housing, but also making sure that our employers are paying people a livable wage. I know that we have very limited tools to that end, but I think that we could look at that, kind of approach it from both sides, if you will.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. I completely agree. I mean, obviously this program is focused on housing, but it takes income to afford the housing that you have. So those are certainly a hand in glove kind of situation. And we'd be happy to pull together some analysis for you on that to see where our peer cities are at.
Leon, I have a
Yes.
quick question about the 66%. How much of that 66% is below 120 in the 80 to 120 range versus above?
A great question. I think that's something I'd have to dive into a little bit more to answer a little more carefully. I know that we specifically called out 80% and below, so I believe we actually are kind of throwing in some 80 to 120 here. And I don't have that number handy right now, but I'd be happy to pull that together for you in the future.
Okay, and
Perhaps when we talk about this program again. Yep.
similarly, while the market, I think, is largely providing rental housing in that range, the 80 to 120 range, I'd be interested to know in how much for sale housing there is that would fit in that range at a 30% mortgage.
Great. We can try to pull that together for you too. I mean, given the strength of median home prices, I'm guessing that number gets smaller by the day right now, but certainly an interesting statistic to have to know kind of what we're doing on the for sale side. So yeah, happy to pull all that together. And as I mentioned, we're going to have a deeper discussion about the housing incentives program with council as we essentially ask you to bless the program, getting it out there for the development community to interact with and see how we can hopefully create additional housing in the community through that program. So that's part of the kind of what's next slide here, which is, essentially council has blessed $2 million in FY21 to be utilized on this program and incentivizing housing. It's our goal to launch a competitive kind of rolling application next month in November. We've had check-ins with city leadership and we will continue to do that, but ultimately have some more discussion with council to, again, bless the program as we issue it out there to everyone. We know, just looking at our numbers, that we've really got to target some deeper levels of affordability, specifically the 30% AMI and below. Initially it's our idea that we'll focus on rental, but we certainly see for sale as being something that could be a huge benefit for our community members, particularly as it addresses some of the generational wealth issues and different things like that when you create a for sale product. I think we're definitely going to have to be stacking this on top of a lot of other resources, and we've kind of already been doing that, as I mentioned in some of those other slides. But this would be something that we could see working in concert with funding provided by HUD, the state, other City of Boise funding or programs. Perhaps a land trust project may also be able to utilize something like this, or perhaps the housing bonus ordinance, some housing created there might also be able to use some of the incentives. So CCDC and the Housing Authority, all these groups can come together to, again, kind of stack these benefits or these incentives to give affordable housing its best shot here in the community. So before I hand it off to Andrea to talk about maximize land use allowances, I wanted to see if there are any questions.
Any more questions for Leon? Well, Leon, I hate to be the one asking all the questions, but I do have a couple more.
Yes.
One is actually just a reminder to council, because we have so many new council members. The $2 million was set aside by council, 2 years ago. I think maybe just after or just before Councilmember Woodings and Sanchez were elected. And the direction at that point was to figure out a way to utilize that money for housing incentives. And so the money has already been budgeted. What's happening now is that the staff is working on ideas for how to use it. Given that it's been so long, trying to figure out a way to start utilizing it as soon as we can. So just a little information. Leon, for me, the question is whether or not we can also, whether we're stacking funding resources or stacking maybe either fee forgiveness or services. It seems like ACHD and VRT ought to be on that list. We've got a lot of impact fees being collected by ACHD that might be included perhaps in some kind of an incentive program, whether or not that's a cash refund by the city if they're forgiven, or whatever it might be, or whether ACHD would reduce them in some instances. It seems like it's worth having that discussion. And then with VRT, just ensuring that whatever program we have takes advantage of where we do have good services, so that we're getting the dual benefit of not only lowering housing costs, but potentially lowering transportation costs as well.
Yeah, thank you for that input. Certainly, I know that my predecessors have had some discussions with ACHD, but time for me to go have that discussion, I guess, as the new program manager. And then concerning the VRT transportation aspect, that'll be a part of the application process, as there's a set of criteria, in a lot of ways similar to what we had with downtown, but I think more specifically focused on what benefits affordable housing throughout the city. But one of the main things is a location criteria in terms of walkability, bikeability, or close proximity to transit. We want to put this housing wherever we would want housing anyways in the community. We want it to make sense. We want it to reduce people's dependence on single occupancy vehicles. So that's certainly top of mind for us as we continue to refine that criteria for the program.
Madam Mayor.
Councilmember Halliburton.
Hey, Leon, I was just wondering if you could maybe go into a little bit more detail about how you and your team envision the ownership aspect working, or that generational wealth, if that's condominiums, or like what are some paths forward like that look like?
Yeah, Councilmember Halliburton, I think that's something that we're still figuring out. We have some peer jurisdictions across the nation that have participated in this program. As a for sale product, we would imagine that it's actually going to be probably a slightly smaller incentive than we would offer for a unit requiring more affordability that's rental rate. Essentially, what you have to do is lock in a term, and you have to guarantee that if the property is sold during that term, that it's to a qualified family from an AMI perspective. And there are several other criteria that go into that. We would need to work closely with our legal team to make sure that we're essentially putting in kind of the necessary checks and balances to make sure that we're not handing over money for housing and that's quickly flipped and back on the market at market rate. We need to lock it in long term. Specifics beyond that, I don't really have. But if you have any other questions, I'd be try to happy to answer them for you.
Madam Mayor, maybe just one quick follow-up. So you sort of envision that as something that's taking place naturally, but it's maybe some type of incentive that you can offer a seller, but not necessarily the creation of units that could be sold. Is that correct?
Well, no, I think that you certainly could. Basically, what you have to do is guarantee that unit serves a specific area median income household level for a specific term. And through a deed restriction or some other mechanism like that, you can essentially ensure that, say, 10 or 15 years, if that property is sold throughout that time, it would go back to a household or a family that qualifies at the same level as that initial group did when they received the incentive. And again, that would be the long-term monitoring of like a deed restricted property or something like that. But the intention is to continue to serve household incomes that the initial award was made to until that term of affordability ends.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I will hand it over to Andrea, and I think I agreed to flip her slides for her. So Andrea, I'll just move on to your slide.
Perfect. Good afternoon, Council. For the record, Andrea Tuning with our Planning and Development Services Division. Leon gave a really good description of our needs and where our current deficits are and how we can move forward with cooperative relationships and cooperative funding opportunities. But a lot of times housing products and the built environment begins with land use and proper zoning. And the council and mayor recognized very early on back in 2019 that we had some concerns with housing. And as a part of that, they had decided that they would review the accessory dwelling unit zoning code. And as part of that, they revamped the code and made some unique allowances to allow for a second bedroom, a little bit larger unit, and then made the unit proportional to the overall site. We have received quite a bit of success with this particular amendment. So when we took a look at our numbers from 2008 to 2018, we had approximately 143 permitted units in that 10-year span. And since we have revised the ordinance since June of 2019, we've actually received approximately 100 permitted units. So in just a short 19 months, we've actually almost caught up to that 10-year period from before. And so this is a really great way to provide a supply of housing within an existing neighborhood that is kind of an invisible density. But that's only one stepping stone. We've got other stones that we have to unturn. And so the city is moving forward with some other unique opportunities. And that first one is the housing bonus ordinance. Back in September, we submitted a formal application to amend the city code to allow for incentives in regard to a reduction in parking, an increase in height, the possibility of streamlining a process in order to provide some additional housing units, because we have recognized the deficit of supply of housing that is within our city. That is actually moving through the public engagement process. We have a website available for individuals to learn more about the housing bonus ordinance, and we have been collecting comments. Our online survey did close on Sunday evening, October 25th, so just this last Sunday. And as a result of that commenting period, we have received over 100 comments in regard to this ordinance, which is pretty exciting. So as we go through the comments, we'll go ahead and compile those in our planning and zoning report and project report. And we will be heard by the Planning and Zoning Commission on November 9th, where they'll be making a formal recommendation to you. And we'll be back before you in December with that formal recommendation and any modifications that may come about based on the public engagement, as well as the Planning and Zoning Commission hearing. So you'll be hearing from us again very soon in December of 2020. And then we'll actually move forward, assuming that we have a positive resolution and you guys support the housing bonus ordinance and all of the details. We'll move forward with our legal readings in January and hopefully have an effective product that we can utilize beginning in February. So that should be exciting. But above and beyond the housing bonus ordinance, we do have the zoning code rewrite, and that is currently underway. We received the official go-ahead from the mayor and council at the beginning of the year, and we have been moving along. So phase one of organization, we've got all of that organized. We've got our public engagement plan, and we have a plan for the future. And so now we're entering into phase two, which is where the fun begins. We will have a formal kickoff on November 5th and 7th. November 5th will be at 6 p.m. To allow individuals from the community to participate. And if they're unable to participate in an evening event, we are holding a Saturday morning event from 10 to 11 a.m. on November 7th to allow them to participate. And we will also open a public survey to gather some of that public input in regard to what's working with our zoning ordinance and what's not, and how we can actually bridge some of those gaps that we currently have today, not only for housing, but for community design and how we want to see our city grow in the future. And then most importantly, we'll also be releasing a diagnostics and solutions report, and that'll actually contain really 3 key components. One will be a professional evaluation and analysis from our consultant, Clarion Associates and Cushlan Associates. They will be identifying where they find gaps within our ordinance and where we may not be utilizing the most modern codes that are currently available. The second component of that will be, hey, where has staff and our elected and appointed officials identified gaps in the code as well? sometimes there's contradictory pieces that occur throughout the code. And so we want to get all of those in alignment and make sure that we are providing our elected and appointed officials with clear direction on what our zoning code allows and does not allow, as well as for our public, so that they can have a predictable environment and they know what they can expect from the development process as well. And then the third piece will actually be hearing from our community, and that'll be a part of the public survey and the public engagement that we go out and hopefully receive really good comments so that we have a really good diagnosis of where we're missing the mark for all of our stakeholders that are in advance. Moving from there, then we'll actually dive into the zoning ordinance development, and we'll be breaking that into different modules. That first one will be, allowed and permitted uses. So what is appropriate in certain zones? And then we'll be also looking at the second module of design. So how do we want our city to look and what are those requirements? And then we'll also have the third module, which is process and procedure. At each one of those, we'll be engaging the public and getting their feedback as we move forward. And then through phase 4, we should have a draft document in whole that we're going to be able to bring through the process. So we will take that to our commissions as well as yourself for additional feedback. And then hopefully in 2 to 3 years, we will have a revised and adopted code that is going to really help support the city to make sure that it's sustainable for years to come. So that's a little bit where we're at with some of the zoning code amendments and processes that we have in the works. But we continually hope to have all of these things occurring and revisiting so that we can get more housing.
Questions of Andrea?
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead, Councilmember Whittings.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I just wanted to inquire about the committee that was formed for the zoning rewrite process. Like, how is that process going? Has it been virtual? Is there any like in-person piece? Has everyone been really engaged? Just kind of a little rundown would be great.
Yes. So we went out to the public and asked for applications to serve on a citywide advisory committee. And we had 81 applicants, and the mayor was able to select 20 committee members. We have now had 2 meetings. Our first one was held in October, and that was an opportunity for us to really talk about the project, similarly to what we just went over today, the process and how that would go, and meet one another. That was held virtually. So that went really well. People are very excited. And then their excitement didn't stop with meeting number 1, which is awesome. So meeting number 2 was held in, we had September, then we had October. And October was equally as great. So we had an opportunity to discuss what the city's mission is, the vision, and then our strategic priorities, which we had an opportunity to talk about what is important to all of us, what our goals are, and then what our fears are as we move through the zoning ordinance rewrite. And what was really great is we have so many different unique experiences and professional expertise. And, really everybody had very similar goals, which is great. So we all have our eye on the prize, and I think it's going to be a really great committee. For the foreseeable future, we will be virtual until we can find a way for all of us to gather safely. But we are going to be looking for those opportunities. But just because we're virtual does not mean that we are not being participatory. So we've had some online interactive sharing of ideas, which has been great. And then all of our meetings are available to the public through the Zoom format, very similar to what we're experiencing today. And then they are also recorded via YouTube. So you can watch it live, or if you missed a meeting, you can always go back and check out what we've done. So
That's great. Madam Mayor, may I just ask one follow-up?
Go ahead.
Andrea, any book recommendations coming out of the group at all on smart growth or anything like that?
We do. So our group has created a share site. And so there are a number of book recommendations, and everybody's actively sharing articles and information there as well, which has really been an interesting thing because so many people have varying interests. And so it's been awesome to see the connection with everybody and their solutions. So missing middle housing seems to be a really big piece that everybody is looking at, identifying how we can do quality form-based codes so that we can have a clearly illustrated and designed code that's easily understandable by everybody. Seems to also be an interest. So
very cool. Thank you so much. I appreciate all your work.
Thank you.
Andrea, early on, we had some discussions about doing some education around zoning. It may have been on your list somewhere, but I didn't see it. Are we still going to do some of that?
Councilmember Clegg, we are. So we are currently in the process of creating 2 videos to begin. So the first one will be what is zoning? And the second one is what is a comprehensive plan? And so those will actually be produced here shortly, and those will be both available in English as well as Spanish. And I believe our very own Councilmember Sanchez will be doing the Spanish version. So.
All right, thank you. And what about, you mentioned that a lot of people are interested in form-based codes. Are we going to do anything to educate people about what that means and how they work?
As a follow-up, Councilmember Clegg, we will. So our goal is through the citywide advisory committee that we will start to introduce, what are the different types of codes available. So to ensure that we're actually getting the best mix of all of those codes. And our hope is that we'll also have a video that follows up that talks about, what is Euclidean code? What is form-based code? What is performance-based code?
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much. It's very informative, and we look forward to hearing more about all of these, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Item number 3 on special business is airport updates. Rebecca. And you're here in person.
I'm here in person. I don't want to miss this fun. All right. Well, good morning. I guess good afternoon.
I guess it is.
It is afternoon. Thank you. I want to take a little bit of time just to go over a few things with you. I wanted to talk about the COVID-19 impacts to our operations, what we're doing with air service, financial relief for our tenants, how that's impacting our budget, construction, and then our long-term capital improvement program. This is not a surprise to anyone. The airport and our aviation industry has been hit severely as a result of COVID-19. In fact, in April, 95% of traffic completely went away. So in the interim, airlines have grounded a number of flights. Our schedules have been changing weekly, sometimes daily, and a number of airlines have done layoffs. Currently, the prediction by aviation industry experts is that there'll be a 3 to 5 year recovery. And that changes, of course, depending on who you ask, but generally we're looking at 3 to 5 years. So I thought it would be fun to go back in time to brighter days when we had more positive news and talk about where we were in 2019 and what we were thinking we would see in 2020. And you can see most of these things have not yet come to fruition. Particularly, we all know that Delta canceled the Atlanta flight. I'm going to get to that. They did reinstate it for November. And the air service to Everett was also canceled. Back in the day, we had 64 straight months of year-over-year passenger growth prior to COVID-19. This is what that looked like on a chart. And this is what we're predicting now. So you can see with 50% of the passenger boardings from 2019, which is what we're predicting, we'll be back to about where we were in 1995. The good news, if there is any, is that we expect that we will recover more quickly than we have in previous downturns. And so this is what it looks like year over year. And you can see that early in 2020, we were trending up. And even in March, passenger travel was only down 49%. And that's because we had a very strong beginning of March. And then you can see significant decreases, almost no passengers in April, but then steadily increasing about 10% per month. And there are some silver linings in all of this. We have some new air service, most notably the long-awaited Delta Airlines flight to Atlanta will begin on November 20th. Early reports from Delta is that it is booking well and that they're pleased with the overall response. Alaska will be doing daily service to Palm Springs, and Allegiant will be doing twice weekly seasonal service to Palm Springs. So that's a market that was not previously served. And then we're also seeing an increase in flights to LAX. The other piece of good news, although it's hard for us to be excited about a 50% decrease in passenger enplanements, the good news is we are actually trending significantly ahead of the national average. You can see that nationwide passenger travel has returned to about 30%, and in Boise, it's returned to about 50%. So we have consistently been tracking ahead of the national average. But this has not been without its consequences, and we all know that there have been some budget implications. Boise Airport received $19 million as part of the CARES Act grant, and that allows us to use CARES funding for anything that is legally permissible under law. And so we are using it to pay for operating expenses in 2020 to help stabilize our rates and charges moving forward. So this year, it's a reimbursement. So we have collected about $11 million in 2020, and that will leave another $8 million available in 2021. Our preliminary numbers show at the end of the fiscal year, we actually are seeing revenues exceed expenses at the airport by about $2 million, just a little over $2 million. So overall, financially, we continue to be in a strong position. Both the airlines and our car rental companies and our terminal tenants, so think food and beverage, news and gift, we have standing agreements with all of those entities. And for all of them, we deferred, we didn't waive, but we deferred charges for April through June. That was brought to council for approval. All of the deferred charges were supposed to be paid in 2020. And then on the food and beverage and news and gift side, we often have a provision that allows us to collect a percentage of sales or a minimum annual guarantee. Generally, the percentage of sales is more than the minimum annual guarantee. In this particular instance, the minimum annual guarantee was more, so we waived the minimum annual guarantee and only collected the percentage. But again, there is still some positive news. And again, council's seen this because you approved the operating agreement, but we did reach an operating agreement with Uber and Lyft. So this will be a new revenue source that will help cover expenses for facilities and infrastructure that we provide to Uber and Lyft. And it will also improve the passenger service by providing dedicated spots for pickup and drop off, as well as spots for queuing. So that will help alleviate some of the congestion that we had been seeing in the cell phone waiting lane. So that brings me to budget. And looking back at 2019, days of cash on hand actually increased by over 200 days. So even though we are in a challenging economic environment, Moody's did rate our bonds and maintained our rating as stable. And it reflects the view that the airport will be able to rely on its liquidity balance to withstand COVID-19. And when we look at our peers in terms of the cost to the airlines, again, Boise continues to be about half the cost of what we are seeing at our peer airports. So financially, we're better able to withstand any downturn in the economy. And if we do need to increase rates, we would have some ability to do that and still be within our peer group. I don't want to dwell on this because council has seen this before, but I wanted you to know we are projecting a net zero operating cash flow for next year. This year, we did, as I mentioned, experience a $2 million revenue for 2020. Which brings me to construction. We are using this time to do things that we don't normally get to do. Things like paint the parking garage, because it's very difficult to paint the garage and the lines when there are cars parked there. And anyone who's tried to park at the airport in 2019 knows how hard it was to find parking spaces. So this is the type of maintenance that we're doing now while we have the opportunity. One of the first projects that needs to be done prior to implementing our BOI upgrade program is relocating the existing Idaho Transportation Department hangar, which is adjacent to the terminal. We are moving that to the south side of the airfield to make room for a future rental car parking garage. This is almost done. There's a taxi lane that goes to that facility, Taxi Lane Sierra. That will be done in November. And also we are working on a taxiway hotel relocation. Again, projects that need to be done when you are not as busy. Repaving our apron parking area is something that we took on this summer. We thought it was a challenging project even in these times, but it would have been even more challenging if we had had our usual volume of flights and activity. This is just a picture of the paving that happens at night. It's an overnight project because during the day, we just can't do it. And beyond the terminal and passenger travel, general aviation continues to be an important mix in our airport operations. Western Aircraft, you may recall, expanded several years ago. They're continuing to expand. They'll be doubling the size of their facility, and they intend to hire 130 new positions with a $17 million project value. Things are also happening and changing in the terminal. One of the big things is TSA has installed some new screening technology. It's a 3D scanner, very similar to what you see in medical imaging. It gives them a better, clearer picture of what is in people's carry-on. So in the long term, it should streamline this screening process. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we are highlighting the new vision, mission, and values at the airport in a very visible way. Do you want to talk about our terminal upgrade program? We've presented to council on this before, but with the COVID-19, the timelines have changed slightly. Just a refresher, our funding sources for capital projects include grant revenue. This is primarily through the FAA for capital projects. Passenger facility charge revenues, those are the $4.50 that's added on to an airline ticket. The customer facility charge revenue, that is added on to a car rental contract. Both of those went into effect or increased effective May 1 of this year. And then our other revenue source for capital projects, of course, is operating cash flow. And a refresh on the projects that we were talking about in 2019 pre-COVID. You can see the rental car garage there. That is where the ITD hangar is currently located. That's being moved over and reconstructed on the other side of the airport. The employee garage just in front of that on your lower right is the employee parking garage. That is a project that we were prepared to begin construction on. We had issued bids and received bids for that project. We have postponed that because right now, as you saw from the previous picture, parking is not in high demand. So we are going to postpone that. We are still working on the public garage design and the exit plaza, as well as the surface upgrades. So those are projects that the design is continuing, and we will make a decision. Once the design is complete, we'll bring it back to council for a decision about whether or not we proceed with a request for proposals and award that. That will involve going out for bonds. I suspect we will get favorable construction rates, hopefully, and also favorable interest rates when the time comes for that. But we're probably more than 6 months out on the design, but that will be the next project that we'll do. So we'll change the order. You can see the public garage is actually located on the surface parking area. The reason we were doing the other garages first is because we didn't have enough parking for those in those other locations. So with parking not being as in peak demand as it was, we can do this parking garage first. It will give us a little bit more flexibility either for employees or rental cars potentially. And then we'll be able to, as demand returns, look at those other projects. We are also continuing with the preliminary design for the rental car parking garage. Each of these projects will take about a year to design and then probably about 18 months to construct. So we're still looking at about a 2.5-year window. So it's important that even though passenger travel is down today, that we're ready and that we're using this time for when passenger travel returns. And then you can see beyond the parking facilities and infrastructure, the terminal expansion. And again, the pier that you're seeing, and I'll see if I can, this here. Right now, this is where we have rental car parking and employee parking. So in order to be able to build this concourse, we need to build additional parking. And so that's what's driving the parking first. But the terminal concourse will still be down the road, probably in the 3 to 5 year timeline, depending on how passenger travel returns. So that concludes my formal presentation, and I would be happy to answer questions from members of the council.
Any questions for Rebecca? Rebecca, go ahead, Councilmember Bajan.
You talked about deferred, I guess it's deferred revenue, but revenues that were going to come in this spring that we gave people the opportunity till the end of 2020 to pay. Is it all going to come in?
Well, we are technically past the end of 2020. And so our accounts receivable are probably slightly higher than we would normally see, but that was taken into account in the year-end numbers. And I think we're still, as I said, going to be ahead $2 million in terms of operating revenue over expenses.
Madam Mayor, if I may, a second question was, the presentation began with speculation that it would take 3 to 5 years to recover. And I wondered what recover meant. Does that mean back to 2019 levels or
Yes.
something else?
Yes, when we're talking about recovery in the industry, we're talking about return to 2019 levels.
Thank you.
Rebecca, quick question. Remind me, the $2 million that we're ahead this year, does that include the reimbursement we've gotten so far on the CARES funding?
It does not include that because that's operating revenue and the CARES grant funds would be considered grant revenue. So it wouldn't be included in operating.
Oh, although we're using it for operating.
We are using it for operating, but it's a grant
Okay,
and it's a reimbursement.
okay. All right, so we're expending and then getting reimbursed. I guess the second question is, with the construction projects sort of, reimagined in terms of which will come first, what is the parking today at 50% of past years? And when do we believe that we'll need that new public parking garage?
We're doing a more detailed study on that. I would say parking is about at 50% of where it had been. And we want to be ahead of the curve because in 2019, we were behind and we were shuttling people. As you may recall, we were predicting that the last expansion of the garage that we did, we predicted that it would last through 2025 was the original forecast, and that it would provide enough space through 2025. And clearly we were out of space in 2018 during our peaks in 2019 continuously. So I would say we want to be ready with that new parking garage when we're at 2018 levels, not when we're at 2019 levels.
Perfect. And then finally, as we do all of these expansions, now that we have service to the airport running till 7 at night and soon till 9 at night, and running most of the day or much of the day at 15-minute headways, is there any discussion about building a better bus stop, if you will, for VRT that maybe is in a location that's easier to access? It's about the furthest one away from anything at this point, and it's a pretty paltry stop.
We do have plans to improve the bus shelter, not necessarily to change the location. It is as you come out the door a little bit to the right.
Quite a ways. It's as far to the right as you can be. It's as far as any other to get on.
When we look at replacing those shelters, we'll make sure that it's as close as it can be without interfering with pickup and drop off, and also the taxi cabs, because it's also on that middle island. So we
Yeah.
will have to look at what is the right placement for that.
And-
But we do have new bus shelters ordered.
Okay, that's helpful. As we order those, it would be helpful if we think about potentially at least getting the conduit in them so that we could do real-time information. The better real-time information we can get, the more likely people will use it.
Well, and we'd like to have that real-time information in the terminal as well, so people
Yeah.
can see it. And we have a spot designated for that. As you may recall, we've improved the signage for the bus,
Right.
but we're reliant on them for providing the real-time information, but we have the spot for it when they're ready to do it.
Okay, well, the 511 system is now up and running, so it may be time to start those discussions.
We can revisit that.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you so much.
All right,
Great to
thank you.
get the update. Item number 4, and our last item for the day, is update on CARES funding. Linda, welcome.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Rick. Oops, I ended up with the wrong, started with the wrong slide. Great. So good afternoon. I'm Linda Lowry with Department of Finance and Administration. Going to give you a quick update on where we're standing with our CARES funding. This is an overview of what we've been awarded in terms of CARES funding as of today. Multiple sources here totaling $27.8 million. This is what we forecast we're going to spend of that award, which you'll see is a little bit more than what we've actually been awarded. We're going to try to take advantage of some FEMA disaster relief funding that we think we're eligible for that we have not been awarded yet. I'll go through these one by one where we stand with each source of funding. So Rebecca just gave a good overview on the FAA and what we received from there for the airport. About $19 million, hopefully enough funding, obviously enough funding to last them to support their operations through 2020, fiscal year 2020, with a remainder for 21. We do think if there's future stimulus packages coming from the legislation, the airports will be taken care of. The HEROES Act that was passed in the House did include additional funding up to $13.5 billion for airports. Housing and urban development. So we received about $840,000 through our normal CDBG program formula. The majority of that has been committed so far. Back in June 30th, 2020, Council did approve the resolution for the allocation of those funds to various nonprofits throughout the community, and you can see how those allocations were awarded below. They've awarded all but $33,000, which they're hoping to retain and continue to monitor these agencies to see if there's a future need at any one of those for additional funding. The DOJ, we were awarded from the Department of Justice $363,000. These funds can be used for law enforcement activities related to PPE purchases, supplies, and medical supplies for inmates. So far, we've, of that award of 363, but only identified about 75,000 in eligible expenses so far. But we have a 2-year window to spend these grant funds. So we do anticipate that we will have future spending under this, so just nothing known at this particular time.
Linda,
Yes.
on those funds, did the previous slide, did those, sorry, have those included any expenditures made through the JPA, the EMS JPA group, access group?
No, this has all been for internal BPD expenditures.
So because we're a member of that, I think there are some expenses. I know the county picked up some expenses that are serving that group. If we have more funds available, it might be a place to look. One of the things they've done is up the training capacity online for all of the members and being able to utilize that. I know that we have access to it out at City Hall West, but it might be worth having a discussion with both fire and police about if there's a way to utilize some of that to go a little bit further on some of those ideas than we've been able to.
Yeah, good idea. We'll definitely look into
Great,
that.
thank you.
Stuff now. And then I mentioned that we do feel like some of our expenses are eligible for FEMA reimbursement, particularly the disaster relief funds that were made available. We've identified a little over $500,000 in backfill expenses for Boise Fire that we think are eligible. And we're in the process of applying for those grant funds right now, and we anticipate that we will get approved for them. The funds for the disaster relief fund will continue to be available as long as the pandemic is declared a disaster. And then lastly, the Treasury funding that we received is largely in the form of the coronavirus relief funds. The state of Idaho was awarded $1.25 billion. They allocated some of their funding to cities and counties across the state. The city of Boise received $7.8 million. Of that, you can see the various sources identified that we will use this funding for. We've allocated $1.5 million for a small business grant program. We spent or anticipate spending about $1.5 million for the homeless response, hotel rooms and various facilities to house and be able to quarantine homeless individuals. $1.7 million we've spent or plan to spend in teleworking equipment, which includes teleworking computers, docking stations for city employees so they can continue to telework, as well as equipment to outfit all of our conference rooms in city facilities to enable that as well. We anticipate spending about $1 million of that just for reimbursement for various city needs related to PPE, various safety equipment, security, digital library services, so on and so forth. And then currently we have about $2.1 million in unidentified use for that funding as it currently stands. We are working with the state right now to understand how we can receive that funding and how we may be able to pass it through to some community organizations, what the best way is to do that in an efficient manner. So,
Madam Mayor,
Go ahead.
the 1.5 for the small business grant program, that's 1.5 that we've allocated, but not necessarily 1.5 that we've spent. Is that correct?
that is absolutely correct. And I have the latest statistics on that program if you're interested.
Yeah, if you have it.
So far, as of last night, we've had about 1.15 million in approved applications in that program. And we have dispersed about 92,000 in that program. We continue to see applications, although the volume has dropped off a little bit from the when we initially opened the program. And we have had a lot of applications that have been started that haven't been finished, and we've contacted applicants, and most often it's because they get in the middle of the application process and they realize they don't qualify, so they don't complete the process. So that's where we stand.
Madam Mayor,
Go ahead.
so did you say there's about another $350,000 left over in there?
Yep, that
Great.
has not been approved yet.
Perfect, thank you.
Yep.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, Councilmember Sanchez.
thank you. So just to piggyback a little bit on that question about the small business grant program, are you seeing a certain type of business that has been applying successfully for that grant?
Yeah, I think we've had a lot of sole proprietors and self-employed individuals, which was one of our target audiences for the program. And we've had a lot of individuals apply for that. I'd say a lot of hairdressers, consultants, self-employed individuals who own their own consulting firms, small like maintenance, plumbing, repair businesses, so on and so forth. So that's the majority of the applications that I think we've been getting.
Great. Quick follow-up, Madam Mayor. So in reference to the folks who have who have chosen not to complete the application because they discover that they don't qualify, is there something when you get halfway there that indicates that, and what would that be?
Yeah, I'd say the top two reasons why people aren't qualifying is, one, they've already received some CARES funding from another source that exceeds the amount that we're offering in this program. We are allowing people to utilize this program and they can collect the difference for what they've received, but if they've received over the 15K, then they don't qualify. And actually another big reason is that their business doesn't reside in the city of Boise. So we are referring them to other municipalities who are offering. Napa and Meridian are also offering small business grant programs. So we are referring them in that case.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Linda, maybe anticipating partly what Councilmember Sanchez was concerned about, are we offering language services and other kinds of services to those folks who might need it in order to get the application filled out?
Yeah, definitely. We've got an online email going that we're constantly monitor with questions. The application is available in Spanish in Zoom grants when they go to apply, and we have people actively working to call customers and try to help them overcome any obstacles that they may have in the application process. We're really working with applicants. We're trying not to deny them outright. We're really trying to understand what their barriers are and trying to get as many people approved as we possibly can.
Great, thank you.
And lastly, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the governor's property tax relief program. It's a little bit different in that this funding is not necessarily coming to the city for the city's use. It's required for us to pass this through to taxpayers, but we are anticipating that the city will participate in this program, which the state is offering to use part of the CRF, the coronavirus relief funds, to cover public safety expenses in exchange for property tax reductions. We do expect this to be funded to the tune of about $27.9 million sometime in December.
So Linda, on that particular program, it occurred to me the other day that many people pay their taxes as part of an escrow that's collected in advance of actually payment of those taxes. Is there some effort to work with the banks to make sure that excess escrow is not collected?
That's a really good question. I'm not aware of anything like that from my personal own mortgage loan and escrow account or anything that I've heard, but it's something that maybe we should start to alert the banking community to that.
Yeah.
I know that people can request a refund from their escrow for any overpayment, but generally that's usually retrospective looking instead of prospective looking. And so, yeah. But yeah, that's a good point. We should.
Yeah, it just occurred to me the other day. So thank you.
Great. Are there any other questions or anything else I can help answer?
Madam Mayor.
Councilmember Halliburton.
Yeah, just a couple slides back when we were talking about the relief funds, both for small businesses and other groups, the 2.1 million to be determined. Maybe you said that and I'm just not recalling. Do we know what our plans are for that 2.1?
Yeah, so Shirley O'Neill and Kathy Griesmeyer in the mayor's office have identified a lot of community groups where there is a need, and they've put together a memo that we've actually sent up to the CFAC committee to try to get approval for the funding. Some of those include a day shelter for the winter for the homeless population, since the Boise Rescue Mission is not able to offer that this winter. Continuing with Catch in terms of staffing the street outreach teams to help again identify vulnerable homeless populations during the pandemic and try to provide services. The Idaho Immigrant Resource Alliance is another potential avenue or potential source to provide funding to that will help with Spanish language public education and awareness in Spanish language for those on the public health emergency. And then funding for the suicide prevention hotline is another need that they have identified as well. So,
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear all those things, especially, you know, with the suicide prevention hotline and some of those other issues that deal with mental health. We know that that's going to be an issue that we see coming up here pretty soon. Do we know if there's any plans with any of the remaining funding for more of our, I guess, our arts, culturals, large event organizations, knowing that they're probably the first ones who got hit and sort of the last ones to recover? And, you know, I'm thinking of organizations as small as like, you know, a bar like Mulligan's or the Morrison Center or the Flicks or, you know, Idaho Shakespeare Festival, those ones that really still don't have a recovery in sight.
yeah, so that's one of the things that we're working really closely with the state is how to access the funding and pass it through to those organizations. The methods that they've allowed us to access the CRF fundings to date have not really suited that type of pass-through activity. And so we're actively working with them to understand how we can do that. So far, we've just been asking those organizations to apply for the small business grant funds, but then we realize that the funds are limited there and sometimes they don't qualify and for other reasons. And so we're really trying to actively work with the state to understand how can you make it easier for us to really allocate some of this funding to these groups that we still feel like there's a big need.
Any other questions?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Go ahead, Councilmember Sanchez.
Yes, thank you. I don't know exactly where it would fall into one of these budgeted categories, but I'm just thinking back to this summer to the success of our mask distribution event that we did. And I know that with Governor Little's press conference earlier this week and talking about our need to step back to another phase, and really encouraging folks to wear those masks to help help flatten the curve. I'm wondering, is there any of this money, are we going to be using any of it to provide masks for those communities that don't have access to them and who are highly susceptible and vulnerable to infection and really challenging outcomes because of the communities they come from?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that this CRF funding is a perfect nexus to that need and the use of funding. And as you can see, we do have some capacity available. And so I think that's something that we should absolutely look into and put on the list as soon as we learn from the state the best way to facilitate that type of activity. And then I know that as part of the gift that we were looking to make to the Idaho Immigrant Resource Alliance, part of that was also for them to provide direct PPE to the communities that they support as well.
Linda, I think that's wonderful. I think in terms of people being able to access masks, I think it should be anybody. Sometimes I worry when I think it's great to focus on that particular community, but I also recognize that we live in a community that, there has been a lot of racial strife. And as we know, the virus doesn't discriminate. And so I would say if we can uplift and really identify, if we can call it as simple as free masks for anybody who wants or needs them, I think that would be great, just so that we can make them available and it's not a matter of a lack of access, that we make it really easy for folks to access this vital key to keeping folks safe. And thank you so much for your presentation. This is very inspiring.
Madam Mayor.
Council President Pro Tem Whittings.
Yeah, Councilmember Sanchez got me to thinking. I know that we do have access through Ada County Emergency Management to some PPE. And I'm wondering if there might be another opportunity for us to distribute those in the community again. And also just for anyone who's watching who might know of an organization that would need some PPE, please get in touch with us because we can put you in contact with Ada County and give you that access to some PPE resources that you might need.
Yeah, I think it's probably worth just reaching out and maybe finding out from the state if they would go ahead and approve some bulk purchases of masks, and we can go ahead and move forward with a program like that.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Any further questions? Well, hearing none, I guess you're off the hook. Thank you so much. It was great. We have nothing on unfinished business or new business.
Madam Mayor, I move that we adjourn today's meeting.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those
Madam
in
Mayor,
go ahead.
before we vote, can I have a point of personal privilege, please, and wish Councilmember Halliburton a very happy birthday.
Thank you.
Well, we could all sing to him, but that might be. Happy birthday, Councilmember Halliburton. Thank you.
Thank you.
Council President Pro Tem. Well, with that, we do have a motion on the floor to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. See you all later. Thank you.
Happy birthday, Jimmy.
Thanks, Lisa.